Yes, this is real. This is an official canonical Doctor Who story, a crossover, and I own it. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. And today we're going to be talking about the comic book crossover with one of the biggest franchises in sci-fi history, as Doctor Who meets Star Trek. Specifically, this is the incarnation of the Star Trek The Next Generation in a comic book story entitled Assimilation2, written by David and Scott Temple and art by J.K. Woodward. That's just, something, this is just astonishing. For those of you who don't know, Star Trek is a series created by Gene Roddenberry back in 1966, with the original series lasting for 3 series before being cancelled by the program at the time by Paramount. I want to say CBS it was on. However, due to a real loyal fan base, where they had movie adaptations in the 70s and 80s before getting a revived series in The Next Generation, and then the series would continue to have this these little segments of series where they get a completely different cast and like a new era of the show. Although when in the 90s some Star Trek shows aired at the same time, so you would have Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager all airing on the same time. It was absolutely mental. It was dominating the sci-fi genre when Doctor Who was at its lowest point, as in the late 80s when Next Generation came out, was the Doctor Who segment of the series was at its 7th Doctor era, with a lot of complaints of cheap budgets, cheap special effects, and that era of the show has been heavily criticised during the time. Although the fan base has had a very warm reception of it looking back. So yeah, it's one of the biggest franchises. The big 3 is Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, and at the time when this was published, I believe it was 2011. I want to say 2011 or 2012. Basically, both of these massive franchises were owned through comic books, because each series has had their comic book rights owned by different people. Most noticeably, Doctor Who has had some of their comics owned by Marvel with their Doctor Who magazine. But their main comic book series, they have swapped them around, and they did give the rights to a company called IDW, which also at the time run Star Trek comics. I believe they still do. And they decided, you know what? We've got 2 of the biggest televised franchises in history. Let's finally put them together and let them meet. But then there comes the bigger question: which iteration of each series should they cross over with? Each series has had different eras and completely different feels and different people. So which series, which era of each show represents which? I would personally have gone for shows, for eras that were aired during the same time. For example, the original series with the 2nd Doctor, The Next Generation with the 7th Doctor, the 2009 reboot series with the 11th Doctor era. You've got these all these different iterations, and I think I agree with a lot of people that the decision here to cross over the Next Generation, the 2nd iteration of the series of Star Trek, crossover with Matt Smith Doctor, who was the current Doctor at the time, to cross them over. It seems really strange, especially how IDW was also producing their flagship series at the time was the reboot Star Trek series the comic book series inspired by that in films. So it's really strange, it's really bizarre how these iterations, I still can't work out the process on why these two, but honestly it doesn't matter. The idea, because the Next Generation was the series that I grew up with. For my history of Star Trek, I grew up with the Next Generation, I grew up with Voyager, and I grew up with Enterprise, which was like a prequel series set in just before the Federation was going out. Basically, it was like the start, their first years of going out into the outer solar system, and the first adventures of Enterprise. So, yeah, that's my history of the show. I later on then grew up with the original series after tracking them down, with the second film, Wrath of Khan, being up there in my favourite films of all time. So, yeah. And I just realised about 6 minutes in, I haven't even actually talked about the story yet. But, I think it's context into the two worlds colliding will be, beneficial, I think, for the audience. But then there comes a bigger question. What villains would cross over these two? What baddies would allow such two great forces to combine to become an even greater alliance with the Doctor and Captain Picard? Well, you see, Star Trek has a villain, and Doctor Who has a villain, which are very alike. They're not the same, but they are very alike. These are the villains of the Cybermen, which we obviously know because we do in the Doctor Who marathon, and the Star Trek villain, the Borg. For those of you who don't know, the Borg are a race that was introduced in the Next Generation series and have appeared in almost all iterations after it. And essentially they are a race of cybernetic beings that basically are Cybermen. They capture people and they convert them into their hive mind, this massive brain. They basically all their brains work simultaneously together to create basically one sentient being, one single entity. Although there is this Borg Queen character that was introduced in First Contact, and I don't know if she's supposed to be part of the collective or if she's some sort of, or if she's like separate. It's really confusing. But essentially what you want to know is that their plan is to take over everything, basically make everything come into them. They don't, like the Cybermen, they don't see what's so wrong with them converting people. Their catchphrase, resistance is futile, is actually a line that is originally spoken by a Cyberman, and a lot of people have cited as that as an inspiration for the Borg. The Cybermen are an inspiration for the Borg. I don't actually know that. I don't know if Gene Roddenberry knew about Doctor Who at the time, but yeah, so it's even like crossing over these two franchises with these particular villains. It just makes so much sense. It's so obvious. If you're going to have a Doctor Who and Star Trek crossover, the first idea in your head would be the Cybermen and the Borg. It's just simple. It's just absolutely simple. For some reason, the trades, you can only really get the trades in two. One collecting issues 1 to 4, and this one collecting issues 5 to 8, with 8 issues overall. I do have the single issues of them somewhere. I just realised I think I have the single issues to some of these somewhere upstairs. I have to go and track them down later on. But the story essentially sees a overwhelming force as the Borg have teamed up with an alien threat, and essentially the story is mainly sold out in the first half by the Enterprise as they basically wondering what's happening with the Borg. They're acting very differently. They don't usually do sneak attacks. usually the Borg would let out a massive warning, resistance is futile, before starting their attack. They don't do sneak attacks. However, here they seem to have allied themselves with another cybernetic creature, later on to be revealed to be the Cybermen, and they basically are going around wrecking everything in their path, with seemingly having a much more strength and much more ambition than they originally had, and seem to be heading straight for Earth with the Star Trek crew originally meeting on this planet that was that's established early on, which Enterprise, the Federation are mining this planet for variable minerals, very rare minerals, but the people of the planet are they're not quite sure about this. Their political stances are, they're a very closed off civilization, and they're not too comfortable with the fact that the Federation are doing it, but they've come to some sort of agreement, some sort of contract, shall we say, where the Enterprise, I keep saying Enterprise when I mean the Federation. The Federation can take their materials if only they abide to certain rules. For example, no teleport and no sneak attacks and stuff like that, the usual gig. And, leave the civilization alone in peace as they dig for the materials. But then the Enterprise gets this information, and Picard gets these feelings, these concerns, and they basically learn that there's this crater. They basically learn that there's this massive attack, and they don't know who started it. But every decision seems to suggest that it's the Borg. And when it's confirmed to be the Borg, they get overwhelmed. They have no idea. They don't even know where to begin. So Picard basically orders people to try and relax, trying to calm down. As we're waiting, the hologram has a new system, has a new thing. So how are we going to, how are we going to fix this? And then once this happens, the Doctor, Amy, and Rory arrive in the holodeck in the, I believe it's like 1920 San Francisco design. And then when we cut into issue 2, we then go back a bit to see what happened with the Doctor and his crew. I might be actually thinking about it. I might have actually got those in the wrong order. I think actually the Doctor one comes first.
1 sec.
Yeah, I got them in the wrong order, sorry. The Doctor's story comes first, as we see the Doctor, Amy, and Rory in ancient Egypt as the Doctor follows his plan. Basically like an average episode of Doctor Who. But there's a psychic crystal which connects the Doctor to the Star Trek universe. And the TARDIS goes, of course, to an alternate dimension, as it's basically firmly established here that Star Trek is an alternate parallel universe. But however, this does kind of have some continuity issues that we have to talk about. You see, in the revived era of Doctor Who, Star Trek has been firmly established as a TV series. Rose mentions Spock in The Empty Child. In Fear Her, the Doctor does that as a reference to a kids show, which is of course a reference to Star Trek. There's a lot of reference to Star Trek as a TV show in the Matt Smith era specifically as well, with reference of a Star Trek-like beam teleport in The Impossible Astronaut, which we've recently talked about. One of the characters looks at the silence and is like, is that a Star Trek mask? In an episode that we'll talk about later on in the series, these female characters pick on a nerd character by calling him a Klingon. So, yeah, it's firmly established in the Doctor Who universe that Star Trek is a TV series. So the idea of parallel universe in it kind of makes sense. And I really don't like the idea of Star Trek being a TV series in Doctor Who. It feels cheaper when you have a crossover like this. As for Star Trek, however, they've never mentioned Doctor Who as a TV series, but they have had references, with the sonic driver being a reference to the sonic screwdriver, as well as reverse the polarity in some of the technobabble, which is of course a reference to Doctor Who, and many other kind of small little references from writers who are fan of the series. But I think it's important to note that when writing a series, I won't go into like full detail on the plot now that I think about it. I think I'll leave it up to the audiences to read it if they so choose. But I feel like if you're reading this, it's clear, because I think the writing team of Scott and David Timpton, they're much more in line with Star Trek than they are with Doctor Who. That is actually completely fine with me. In fact, I think I would prefer it like this as in the other way around. Why? Well, Doctor Who is always about exploring different kind of worlds and different kinds of civilizations and culture, in a sense. When you think of Doctor Who, there's no two episodes that are the same in a way. It's always, moving around and exploring these different universes, if you will. While Star Trek is a franchise which, does similar things, explores the universe, explores the civilizations, but it has a distinct feel. It has a distinct environment. It has a distinct culture in the Star Trek the Federation Star Trek world. When you think of Star Trek, there is a particular type of sci-fi, a particular type of story that comes to mind. So it seems like actually this kind of crossover really does work. Another aspect which I think that also really works, but again, the franchise, in terms of what the writers and this particular person is thinking about, is clearly more in line with Star Trek than Doctor Who. But it's its art. The art by J.K. Woodward has this paint aesthetic, almost like Renaissance. I won't have too close because I don't want to get copyrighted. But you can see that there's this paint. It doesn't have like your traditional comic book art. It has this paint aesthetic, which I believe is actually art style which is used a lot in the Star Trek comic books. I don't know, this is the only Star Trek comic books I've read. I personally really love this art style. I think I've stated in a previous Doctor Who comic review vlog that I've done, I'm somebody who doesn't like, not that I don't like, but someone I don't gravitate towards traditional comic book art style. I love it when artists go one step and beyond. Artists like J.K. Woodward, artists like Alex Ross, Eric Rumlan, stuff like that, something which feels like you could see this in like an art gallery. It's got some really, it's just really nice to look at. However, like I said, you can clearly tell that there's favoritism here, as the Star Trek crew are presented very well here, and clearly the artist is familiar with their designs to the point where we can have a unique angle of the characters, make it seem like almost photo-realistic. There's a great one with Worf in the second volume, if I can find it. Oop, I think I've gone too far. That's not it. Can't find it now. But yeah, you can tell that the artist is very familiar with the art of the Star Trek franchise. I don't think I can find it.
Sorry, this is kind of embarrassing.
Nope, I can't find it. Never mind. But in terms of Doctor Who, though this might not be distracting for audience members that aren't familiar with the series, as somebody who is obsessed with Doctor Who, is absolutely nuts with Doctor Who, it's clear that the majority of the art is based on promotional footage and screenshots from this episodes. I've noticed a lot, specifically from episodes like Let's Kill Hitler, and oh, what's the other one? The Doctor's Wife, mainly taken from those two episodes, which those are the episodes which you have the Doctor with these much more awe faces, are episodes which, the Doctor's more awe-inspired by the situation he surrounds himself in. So it does kind of make sense, and the art is never done in a way where it's distracting, where the Doctor's got a wrong facial expression. Sometimes the art makes him look like he's got that, oh yeah, we're gonna win this, we've got the upper hand, facial expression, when the scene doesn't really call for it. But again, it's not too distracting, he always has the right facial expression. It's just, as somebody who is familiar with Doctor Who, I can see like the angles, the facial expressions, they are ripped right off certain production photos and certain episodes, screenshots of certain episodes, which is kind of distracting. But I do understand that the artist might not be too familiar with Doctor Who, but I like how they kept to this art style. I also really like the Cybermen in here. They're given it's the rebooted 2006 design, but here, because of the paintwork, for some reason the artwork makes them look really flat. However, here it actually makes them look really cool. They have this kind of almost eerie presence about them. But let's talk about the Cybermen and the Borg, because for the first half of the story, it's all about our crew members of the TARDIS and Enterprise basically trying to work out how to stop the alliance between the Cybermen and the Borg. However, it turns out that they don't have to. The Borg ship has suddenly retreated back to its home world, and they were halfway through assimilating their planet before they just stopped. When they go to investigate, it turns out that the Cybermen and the Borg alliances end, and they've started fighting with each other. And Picard is like, good. Finally, hopefully the Cybermen could get rid of them. At worst, the Cybermen would wipe out the Borg. At best, they would fight over and they would kill each other in a crossfire. However, the Doctor is just like, no, you can't do this. The Cybermen, whatever you think of the Borg, the Cybermen are worse. And if they are able to convert Borg technology into their consciousness, into their Cybermen designs, they will have the ability to not only conquer your universe with ease, they will be able to conquer every single universe. They decide to conquer other universes, including the Doctor's. This means the stakes are extremely high. Both universes are in danger. However, and I hate to be that guy, I doubt the Cybermen would have any chance against the Borg. I think if you watch both series and both villains, I think it's kind of clear that the Borg would easily have the upper hand. In my opinion, though they both are a race that they adapt, it seems like the Borg would adapt a lot quicker, a lot easier. Hell, there are many scenes in the Star Trek series in which they're firing their phasers at the Borg. They get one or two shots before their shields calibrate to the phaser's frequency, and they basically are shielded completely from the phasers. So in any given battle, the Enterprise only really gets 2 shots of the Borg, and that's it. Whereas the Cybermen, though they do adapt, they do evolve, it's a much more slower process. It's much more akin to evolution, where they come back and they're like, okay, how can we improve this? We will then alternate ourselves a bit more. It's not like a almost simultaneously thing. But I guess as big franchise starring a series revolving mainly around the Star Trek side of things, it does make sense to kind of balance it out. We have the Doctor Who villain as the main threat, which puts this uneasy alliance where the Borg actually ask for the Federation's assistance, and they actually ask the Enterprise for an alliance to help them retrieve the Borg's library systems so they can come back and and take down the Cybermen with ease before they get to the home world, and the Cybermen cyber convert the Borg collective. However, Picard is very unwilling to, and for good reason. For those of you who know your Star Trek lore, this story, if you don't, the story actually gives you a flashback where of the episode of the two-part Star Trek story, The Best of Both Worlds. For those of you who don't know, in that story, the Borg basically capture Captain Picard and turn him into a Borg, renaming him Locutus the Borg, and basically the Borg have a much higher upper plan. In that story, they are defeated and Picard is converted back into a human. However, the scars, the ramifications of the story is felt throughout the series and no more present in here, as Picard is very unwilling to even think of an alliance with the Borg. They have tortured him. They have put him through hell. There is no way he is retrieving him. And him and the Doctor have this fallen out. There's also a scene with the Doctor and Guigan. I really like Guigan. She's a character in Star Trek. She's basically one of Picard's best friends, and she is kind of has this connection with timelines, and she has kind of this sixth sense, and she's very similar in sense to the Time Lords. And so when the Doctor and her meet, there's this kind of these creatures that are much more like above humanity, but they're trying to like stay in their culture, in their civilizations, and they're like talking. It's like, that's really interesting. You rarely see that in Doctor Who, unless the Doctor's talking with a villain such as the Master. So to see this kind of relationship is very unique and it's very cool. And with the 11th Doctor as well, the 11th Doctor, Amy and Rory, are really well captured here. I feel like Rory and Amy get the kind of short end of the stick. The story is mainly focused on the Doctor. Rory and Amy do get some great scenes dedicated to them. In fact, when Picard is unwilling to, Guigan actually suggests... Oh no, it's not Guigan, it's... what's her name? The telepath. What's her name? Diana Troy. She basically suggests that Amy would go to Picard to try and reason with him, and she kind of gets him to lower his guard as she gets the Doctor to basically show him the future if the Cybermen are able to take down the Borg. And we actually see the Klingon home planet of what's the Klingon home planet called? Quasar, something like that. They're converted by Cybermen. We also see Selene and Jadoon converted by Cybermen, implying that the Selene and Jadoon are races. I know Selene is not the name of the race, but Raxifocolian Vanapatorians, that they exist within the Star Trek franchise, and basically then also as well the world. In less than 20 years, I believe he says, Earth would basically be useless against this massive armada of Cybermen with enhanced Borg technology. So Picard agrees to work with the Borg, and there's this really great scene where they go to an abandoned planet where they will meet, and the Borg basically have this representer, which they call the Conduit. However, he's actually a Borg converted drone of somebody which Captain Riker, Captain Picard's number one, somebody he used to work with, one of his friends. And the Borg kind of just like, we thought that a face which you would be familiar with might ease negotiations. And yeah, that didn't go so well, as Riker just like lashes out, but he is kind of tries to contain himself as he talks to Dr. Crusher about, how hopefully can we get him back, which Crusher highly doubt because it's been so long and it's so much traumatic memories there. He might not want to leave the Borg collective. And then that kind of has like a little subplot, as Riker is kind of out of the action in the final act, as the Doctor and... well, first of all, the Doctor needs to go back in time to a moment where they know where the Borg is, so that the Doctor can retrieve some information that the Borg need, so they can go back and basically go into their ships and then reconnect it with the Borg collective. So actually what happens is that the Doctor, Amy and Rory go back in time to the Battle of Wharf 359, which is actually taking part in the events of The Best of Both Worlds. And the Doctor, Amy and Rory actually are in the Borg ship when that episode is during its adventure. So next time you watch that episode of Star Trek, remember that Amy, Doctor and Rory are travelling in the Borg ship somewhere. And they actually encounter the cutest of Borg, which is actually one of the cliffhangers. And that is just a really cool cliffhanger. That's a really cool idea, to have the Doctor Who crossover with also have them time travelling to one of Star Trek's most well-known stories. It's just such a great idea, and the fact that at this point then it's just Amy and the Rory and the Doctor as the main protagonists going around this episode for a bit. It's just a really cool and unique viewpoint in that story, and the Doctor kind of realizes how much Picard has sacrificed. Well, I say sacrifice has been forced, has been put essentially into slavery due to the Borg and their philosophy and their conversion therapy. So it's all messed up. It's all, it's just really cool to see. But the Doctor gets what he needs and transports Amy, Rory and himself back to the present of the story, the presence of the story. And basically, even though the Borg conduit is helping LaForge, Enterprise's engineer, to enhance their engines to the point where the Enterprise will travel as fast as it can, it's still not strong enough for them to catch up with the Borg ship controlled by Cybermen. So the Doctor comes up with a plan to collect up a handful of characters and use the TARDIS to get there, as they go around and Amy, Rory, Lieutenant Worf and a handful of red shirts go looking for the engines to distract them, whilst the Doctor and Picard actually meet up with the cyber leader, who is now partially converted as Borg. And one of the big criticisms with this story is that the cyber controller in this story really doesn't feel Cybermen. The Cybermen are mostly known for their emotionless personalities, because they are, they remove emotions from their consciousness. However, there are hints of emotions in their Earthshock design, which is something I've gone into detail. If you want to know my opinions on that, go check out my Earthshock and Attack of the Cybermen vlog. However, in the revived era with these new stompy Cybermen, the Cybermen, which I believe this story is, these are supposed to be the parallel universe Cybermen from the revived era. They're a lot more motionless. However, the cyber controller here, he has a personality, and his personality is, haha, I will defeat you all. I will sprout out my plan as I'm going to kill you. And though I do like, it is really cool to see a cyber controller with a lot of personality and gives the Cybermen essentially a personality of their own, I feel like the personality here might be overboard, and the cyber controller seems really cartoonish and seems really one-dimensional, a silly, stupid, mustache-twirling villain, and it is kind of a disappointment. But they get the defeat. They defeat them all, and and they seem to be all the day is saved. However, the conduit, after everything is saved and they've stopped the Cybermen, sees the TARDIS and is just like, "This is amazing. We will add this to our collectiveness," and they have a battle inside the TARDIS where Worf basically picks up the conduit and throws him out the TARDIS into the time vortex, as well as Data gaining the TARDIS consciousness, which is previously seen in stories such as Partner of the Waves and The Doctor's Wife. So that is a really cool little nod to Doctor Who. And then our characters go our separate ways and they say goodbye to one another. And that is Assimilation Squared. And though it has its problems, although, this story, despite being loved by the fan base, has been heavily criticised for many just plot elements, plot holes, certain bits that don't add up. I think we can all agree that for the majority this story is strong and really is a great representation of not only both franchises but both eras of the franchise. It's a great representation of Star Trek The Next Generation, and it's a great representation of the 11th Doctor era. And with its very unique art style, even if it does rely on tracing for the Doctor Who segments of the story, I have to admit, this is not only one of my favourite comic book stories, it is my favourite comic book story that I've ever read. If I did a ranking of my favourite comic book stories, Marvel, DC, IDW, Dark Horse, everything, this would be number one. And yes, I know a lot of people might not get as much enjoyment, but as somebody who is a massive fan of both franchise, a fan who grew up with these as a kid and wanted as always to see a crossover, it really just fills up the room. And the art style gives it this very professional, not as cheap as what I've seen before with Doctor Who comic books and some Star Trek comic books. This does genuinely feel canon. This genuinely feels like something which a group of people have put together and put their hearts and determinations upon. And so I highly, highly recommend it. It's a story you will not regret. And so that's Assimilation Squared. I think I've just started this marathon series just so I can talk about this. So join me next time when the Doctor, Amy and Rory find themselves in a 1970s hotel, but it's really strange. The corridors seem to be unending and there seems to be people's nightmares inside the rooms. So join me next time for The God Complex, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!